My name is Elmer J. Hawkins Jr. I was not born in a city at all. I was born in a farmhouse in Jefferson County. It's in Illinois. It was my grandparent Richard's house. And my mother had gone there for delivery. And my sister was there with us, with the family, and my father naturally. And it was June the 15th, sometime between midnight and I would say 4 or 5 o'clock, I was born. I grew up in Jefferson County, except for one small time whenever I moved to Marion County. But Marion County was where my father was born, and we had moved up there with my grandfather in my grandfather's house because he needed somebody to take care of him, and he had offered us the farm if we stayed there with him. So we went up there for that purpose. And of course, I went back to Illinois, back to Mount Vernon, because my brother decided he wanted to play with some baby skunks. And they were underneath the back porch where they had the brood, and he squeezed one of them a little bit too hard. And it didn't do very much good for the apartment, for the house. So my grandfather detested my brother after that. And my mother, he used to throw rocks and clots of dirt at my brother, who was 2 years younger than me. And my mother would not put up with it. So she said, no, we're not going to stay here. So we moved back to Mount Vernon, and I grew up in Mount Vernon. Started in grade school at a school called Horace Mann, named after the educator. Then we went from there to the farm. I went to a country school up there, had 8 rows of chairs and desks. I had one teacher. 1 row was for first grade, 1 for the second grade, all the way up to the 8th grade. The teacher held classes for everybody at different times during the day. I was fortunate enough we had to walk to get there. We had to walk 1.25 miles on a dirt road. And it snowed, and it rained, and the road got muddy, but we still walked it. I remember one day the teacher sent my class out together. It was fall of the year, and she sent us out together, something that we thought we'd like to have to remember. I found a plant with some very pretty red leaves on it. And those red leaves, I pulled them all off and took them had them in my desk. Well, it turned out there was poison ivy. And I got home, and my poison ivy started breaking out, and within 2 days, I could not see. My eyes were swollen shut from the poison ivy. My father carried me to the doctor in Kell, Illinois, which was about 3.5 miles away, and carried me back. And I was, as I said, I was about 7 years old at the time. From there, we moved, as I said, back to Mount Vernon. But going back to whatever, after I was born, we lived in a place in the country, a farm, where there was a place that was owned by a woman named Ruth. And we always referred to it as Ruth's place. And I can remember us being there. I was 2 years old. My sister was just starting kindergarten at the school, or not kindergarten, but first grade. She started early. A guy used to come by and pick her up every morning with his horse and his buggy. He had picked up other kids, and then he would bring them home. Well, I was there with my mother all the time in between, and my mother liked to sew. She left the sewing machine open one day, and I went over and I started playing with it. I spun the wheel around, and I stuck my finger into there, and I run the needle all the way through my fingernail, through my finger, and then I couldn't get it out. So she had to come and pull the needle back out. And then about a few days later, the guy was bringing my sister back from school, and he had a heart attack. But the horse knew every single stop, and he stopped in front of the house. My daughter got out, and they did not know that that guy had died and had a heart attack until after he got home. So it was quite an experience for the family.
Wow.
We also had an incident with our cow. We had the barn. House was up on a little incline, and his barn and his stable for pig ties and stuff were down at the bottom of the hill. This cow, somehow or other, got into the bed of grain, and she ate and she ate and she ate until she just bloated up, and she died from eating too much. So I learned a lesson. After we left there, we moved to a place called Middlebrook. My brother was born at that place also, and his name was Richard. He's about a year and 9 months younger than me. But we moved to a place called Middlebrook, which was outside Mount Vernon on the east of the city. And I can remember being there very distinctly. At that time, my brother and my older sister and my brother were there too. We were all going to school out that area. But we had the yard was fenced in around the house, so that we could go out and play in the yard, and Mom didn't have to watch us all the time. We were always there close. But this one day, my brother had watched a dog that we had, a pet, and he had dug out and made a place underneath the fence where he could get out. And he decided if the dog could get out by digging that way, he could get out too. So he dug himself a little tunnel underneath the fence, and he got out. But then they had to go looking for him all over the neighborhood. I can remember one night in particular, my parents had some friends come over, and they played pinochle. And Dad had made some home brew, and he had served it to the people. And they had left a little bit in glasses that they had there. And my mother had taken the glasses and set them on a table in the kitchen. So I come along and I saw those glasses, and I drank everything that was left in them. That was the first. I had my first drunk at the age of about 4 or 5. And I remember coming back. I don't remember it, but I was told about it. Coming back into the house room where they were all sitting talking, and my mother had taken her shoes off, and I guess they were sitting there on the floor beside her chair, and I go dancing around and waltzing around those shoes, and I sang, "I'm dancing around Mom's old shoes. I'm dancing around Mom's old shoes," and that was incident that was happy there. From there, we moved down to the northern part of Mount Vernon, on a place that's the Toll Road. No, it was actually that's not the wrong place. We had moved to. It was on off of 9th Street and Park Avenue, and at that place, all of us were just still going to school. We went to a place called Lincoln School at that time. It was named after Abraham Lincoln. It was about a mile from my house to the school. There were no buses, no streetcars. You walked both ways. And everybody walked, all the kids walked together. And it was a very quiet, neighborhood was easy to get along with. People were easy to make friends. We had a pasture behind the house where we were living, and it was fenced in. And friends of ours had a Shetland pony, but they didn't have a place to keep it. So Dad told them they could bring it out there and put it in that pasture. The pony was he was called Shorty. That was his name. But I used to ride that pony up and down the hill, and one day I got him out to the road, and I got him running as fast as he could, and I stood up in the saddle. I didn't have a saddle. I stood up on his back and rode him down the hill going full speed without falling off. I don't know how I did it, but I did.
Did you have a harness, or were you just...
He had a bridle.
Okay.
But I went down, and it was one of those incidents. And then another time, after we moved from that place to a place at the toll road, which is a highway, not a road. It was just an oiled road, and had the pony over there. And we had a big tree in the backyard. We had a pasture. There's a big field behind us. There was a little pasture. We kept the pony there. And I remember one day I liked to go out and ride him, but I would play like I was Tom Mix or the old Ranger or something like that. And I would ride that pony as fast as I could underneath the tree, and I'd reach up and grab the branch and pull myself off the pony as he was roping. But I never got hurt doing it. I don't know why. But this big old oak tree, I used to sit up there. I made a platform where I could sit there and I would read. I'd read a lot of Western books, a lot of other books. But I also decided that there was a big tree down at the bottom of the hill. This was on top of the hill. It was not big, deep, not a real high hill, but it was there. And as I was put this cable up, tied the cable to way up high this oak tree on top of the hill. And then I run the cable I put a pulley on it, and I run the cable all the way down to the bottom of the hill, about 2 feet or 3 feet above the roots of the tree. It was another big old oak tree. And then I had the cable on there, and I put a rubber tire on it, hung it from the cable, or from the pulley. And I pulled that thing up to the top of the tree, to the pulley, and then I'd get into the thing and let loose and go flying down the hill on the pulley. And I had to be careful, because if I did fall off or get off of that tire before I reached the tree, I was going to brain myself. So just before I get to the tree, I would roll out of the tire and roll, just keep rolling down the rest of the hill. And never got hurt once. Just did it. But finally, we moved away from there too. And then we moved to the south side of Mount Vernon. And my father at that time was working at the shoe factory called Forsheim Shoes. They made them there. So we moved closer to his place of work. And here again, there was a big field out there. And they used to bring these Ford tri-motor planes would fly in there to give people rides. And I got a free ride because I'd go over there and I'd help them work on the plane and take care of it. I wasn't very old, but I was 4th, 5th, 6th grade, something like that. And so we lived there for about 4 years. And then from there we moved just about 3 blocks away, but it was in another school zone. This time I'm going to a school. It was close to the fairground. And the name of the school was Field School. So I'm going to this Field School now, and that's where I graduated from. I remember one thing in there that they had a minstrel show, and I became a blackface in a minstrel show. I was in the 8th grade at the time, and I had a script that I had to read and tell. And I told people that I had this hen, and that she was the most interesting hen you can imagine, because if you held a red cloth up in front of her, she laid red eggs. If you held a blue cloth up, she laid blue eggs. If you had a green cloth up, she had held a yellow light. But I said I made one big mistake. I held a patchwork quilt up in front of her, and she died trying. And I can remember telling her, and everybody got a laugh out of it, and Mom was there, and I guess I made quite a fool out of myself. But that was part of growing up. Then I went to high school. Now we moved from the south side. I actually started whenever we still lived down that area. But whenever I was a freshman in high school, we moved back to the north part of town, out in Vernon, again on a toll road. And now that I'm going to high school, and I had to walk to high school every day and back again, and I went 4 years to high school without missing a day. And I was never late, not once. And I took care of the household duties that I had to do to help my mother get things going, particularly on a wash day, which was usually on Monday. Before I went to school, I would get up out of bed, and I would draw from our well, because we had a well, we didn't have running water, and I would draw the water that she needed for the washer. And I would take it out and build a fire in the backyard. I had a kettle out there. And I would heat the water so she could wash the clothing. And then I'd take that back in and put it in the washing machine for her. And then I would draw 2 tubfuls of rinse water so she had water so she could rinse the clothes before she hung them out to dry. Then I could go to school. And I did that every week. While I was in high school, the World War II got very intense, and I was very upset with the Germans. I did not even want to talk to Germans or think anything about them. And I remember my aunt, my mother's sister, was living in Buffalo, New York, and she came to visit. And I did not realize it, but the man that she was seeing at that time and came with her was a German. And I ranted and raved about the Germans in front of him. My mother took me into her kitchen and said, "You don't do things like that. That man's a German." But I did anyway. And then whenever the war started, I can remember that day very distinctly. It was Sunday afternoon. About 3 of us boys my age were sitting in a local filling station, gasoline station, and having Cokes or ice cream Dixie cups. And the news came out that the war had broke out, that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And whenever that news, the radio was on in that station, their room, and we all heard it, and we got quiet, very, very quiet. And then we decided, without saying a word, we all walked out the door, went our separate ways. And I went home, and Mom and Dad were they were listening to a little table model Philco radio that we had. And they had heard the news. And they knew what was going to happen. And it did. Because the National Guard was called up to defend the country, the 33rd Division, Illinois National Guard. And they were organizing an Illinois Reserve Militia. At 16, I joined that Reserve Militia. And the only time I didn't go to high school was the week, or 2 weeks, that I was on guard duty at a fluorspar mine in Rosicler, Illinois, which was near the Mississippi, or near the Ohio River, on the east side of Illinois. And I had one incident that I was on guard duty one night. It was probably around midnight or 1 o'clock. And I was at the back gate Nobody out there. It was all open country, not a house any place. But the fence was there and there was a gate there. So I was out there guarding that particular area at 16. And I saw this car come turn into the road that came up behind the mine, the area that the mine was in. And he kept coming, very slowly, kept coming, and I saw him. I stepped out in front of them in the middle of the lane. I brought the rifle up to my, I had an infield rifle that I was carrying at that time. I carried it up to my chest, and he still didn't stop. He kept coming right toward me. And I had the rifle up, I loaded the rifle, I pulled the cartridge into the chamber, and I brought it up to my shoulder. And whenever I did, he stopped. He backed up, turned around on the left, so I never really knew who it was. I don't know if it was a spy or, because that fluorspar was used to process aluminum, and they needed aluminum for airplanes at that time. So that's why we were out there guarding it. I never got, high school never logged me in for doing that job. So that's why I say I never missed a day of high school. But I did, I missed those days. After they were called up and we got their duty, and I got older, I knew that I was going to have to go into service of some kind. My father had been a Marine in World War I. He had served in 5 different battles in France. The last battle he had fought in was Belleau Woods. It was the last big battle of the war, in which the Germans never thought we could drive them out of those woods. But my father's company and some of the other battalion did the job. And what they did is that they crawled with a rifle here, and they edged their way up across the left field into grass, and the Germans were shooting above them, over their heads. And they crawled right up to the German lines and where they could take control, which they did, and that ended the war. Now then it was my turn. I had asked this friend of mine, his name was Arvid Augustin, if he thought that he would like to go into the service. And he said yes, he would. I had a cousin who, instead of being named Elmer John, was named John Elmer. He was named after my father because my father had been reported missing in Germany. He was in the Air Force, and he was stationed at Hickam Field in Hawaii. And so Harvard and I hitchhiked from Mount Vernon, a distance of about 65 to 70 miles, to St. Louis. We went to the recruiting station for the Army Air Corps. And we could, at that time, 18, you were not an adult. You were still a kid. And so you could not say, I want to enlist and be taken in. Your parents had to sign the enlistment papers saying that it was okay for you to go. So we got the papers and we took them home. And I didn't say anything to the family. We all sitting around eating dinner. I could still see the table that night. There was an oblong table, kind of like the ones you saw at the VFW. And I was sitting at the end of the table on my father's right side. He was sitting there next to me, and Mom was sitting next to him. And my sister, Betty, was sitting at the other end of the table. And my brother, Dick, was sitting across from me. And the one spot was left empty. The table was there. I didn't say a word. We just ate their dinner, and my father finished eating. And he turned to me and he says, "What did you do today?" I said, "Nothing interesting." I said, "I just was around all day." He says, "I don't want you lying to me." He said, "What did you do?" So got up, I said, excuse me, and I got up and went into the other room where I had the enlistment papers, and I brought them back in, and I said, well, I brought you these to sign. I said, I hitchhiked to St. Louis, and I hitchhiked back, and I brought these papers. You have to sign them before I can enlist. Dad looked at the papers, he handed them to Mom, and then Dad crossed his arms, like this. He sat there looking at me for a couple of minutes. No, not a couple of minutes, but it wasn't that long. And then he told me, he says, well, I guess you're not man enough to be a Marine. Well, I was, and I proved it. Because the next day I hitchhiked back to St. Louis. I took the papers to the Army Air Corps, I gave them their papers back, walked a half a block down to the Marine Corps recruiting station, and got the enlistment papers. I took them home then, and again he asked me what I did, and I gave him the papers. Well, he signed them. Mom was very reluctant. She hesitated, and finally she signed them. And then I had to take them back, which I did. And they told me that on, I think it was a Tuesday night, that I was supposed to go to Central, Illinois. They mailed me tickets for the train. Go to Central, Illinois, and get on the CNEI, Chicago and Eastern Illinois Railroad. And I did. The next morning, before daylight, we arrived in Chicago. Arvid and I were there. We were taken to they picked us up at the train station and took us to the recruiting area where they were swearing everybody in, checking them out, and doing all kinds of tests and what have you. And I remember taking the colorblind test, and I remember getting some shots. Anyway, at noontime, just before noon, they told us that we were through at that office, that we had to meet everybody at the training station, at the South Street Station in Chicago. Those of you who've been in Chicago, you lived there, you know where the loop's at. It was on the southwest corner of the loop. And so Arvid and I walked around Chicago all afternoon. And that night, at 7 o'clock or 7:30, just after dark, we were all there, and they came and picked us all up and put us, get us all together. They herded us, you might say. And we took us and put us on a train. On the train, we met another bunch of recruits from Indianapolis area. They were from Indiana and Ohio. At that stage of time, if you lived east of the Mississippi River and you were recruited, you went to Parris Island for your training. If you're west of the Mississippi River, you went to the San Diego, to the recruit depot there. Well, because of the number of people that were enlisting in the Marine Corps at that time, Parris Island was full. So they sent, even though we were east of the Mississippi River, they sent us to California. It took us 3.5 days, I think. I don't know, 3 nights, I know, and I think probably 4 days. It had to be more like 4 nights and 3 days, I guess, to get to California on a train. Just before we got to California, we would dip the train track down through Mexico, and then came back up, and we went into right downtown, you might say, it's where the train station was, and it's still there, in San Diego. And they got off the train. It was after dark. It was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 o'clock, and they took us to the recruit depot, and they took us to the barracks and said they'd be there to see us tomorrow morning. and they were there bright and early. They gave us each, well, they gave us each a box to put stuff into, personal items. And they took us all together, and they put us in formation, in a platoon, and they took us over to get a haircut, which they clipped everything off. They took us to wherever we went to get the uniforms, but we get dungarees, and jackets, and pants, and we got boondockers, shoes that come up to your ankle and over your ankle. Got socks, got skivvies, underwear, street shirts, and shirts that were boxy shirts, and we were told to. Well, they also took us and made us all go take a shower, and they took us all back to the barracks, and they says, get out of your. Oh, they had taken us to the PX too. And the PX, they gave us a galvanized bucket, 2.5 gallon galvanized bucket, a bar of Fell's naphtha soap, toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, things that we needed to keep ourselves clean. And they took us back to the barracks, and they said, change your clothes. They fold your clothes up and put them in a box. And they took all of our clothes with our names and everything was on it, and they addressed them back to our parents, wherever we were from. And that was my first day in boot camp. Before I went through the whole thing. At that time, Marine Corps today does 12 weeks. We did those 12 weeks in 8 weeks. The things that they did today, we did in 8 weeks. And I don't know. It gets under your skin. It becomes part of you. You're a part of it, maybe, but it's part of you too. But the 8 weeks went fast. And we marched. We learned how to march. We learned how to do all kinds of things. We learned how to use a rifle. The rifle that you saw at my birthday party was a rifle that my father had brought home from Germany. If you looked at it closely, you'll see there were no serial number on it. Dad has filed the serial number off. But I had the same model of rifle, the same make. And that's what I've learned to fire in formation and on a rifle range and everything. That was the rifle I used. But whenever I went to radio school, I still had it with me. It was still issued to me. And I got through radio school. That was a 12-week course. I should have said I enlisted on the 15th of April, because that's the day I enlisted in the Marine Corps. The day I was sworn in. So it just seemed that the radio school was a natural thing for me, and I don't know how they selected people for the radio school, but we took all kinds of tests, here and there, different kind of things. And it was I guess they took the aptitude test and decided what they wanted to do with you, or where they thought you would do best, serve best. I was selected to go to radio school. I became one of the top radio operators here. Then we were sent, after I got out of radio school at 12 weeks, we were sent to Camp Elliott. Camp Elliott was where we were supposed to get our field training before we went to a battle site. Because the war has been on now for quite a while, since December the 7th. And we did a lot of training there. But I also did one thing that I never got caught at. I was put on duty for the chow hall, and I didn't like it. I did one day of it. I never showed up the second day. But I did everything else I was supposed to do except go back to that place where I was supposed to go. We finished our field training, and then I remember the morning came, they woke us up about 5 o'clock, and we loaded us onto trucks with our sea bags, which were heavy. They were stood up about that high, and they were about that big around. And we had I had clothes, and all of our clothes were in there, and uniforms and everything. They took us to the docks in San Diego. Got there probably about 8 o'clock in the morning. And they put us in formation out there, and there was a ship that was tied up at the dock, had been a luxury liner that people traveled to and from Europe on. The name of the ship was the USS Loreline, and it had been converted to a troop transport. And we went aboard, but we sat there waiting for it to tell us. It was taking on cargo at the same time we were sitting there. It was, like fuel and food items that we were going to need while they were in transportation, all that kind of stuff. But we sat there from 8 o'clock in the morning until, I would say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon before I boarded the ship and went to my quarters. And shortly after that, we sailed. And I can remember standing at the rail of that ship, and I had $5 in my pocket. And I sat there and I said to myself, I'm never going to need these again. So I tried to see how far I could skip them across the ocean water. So outside of San Diego, there's $5 there in the ocean that belonged to me. We went from there without escort. We had no Navy escort at all. We went to a group of islands, and I can't remember the name of them right now, but the Army was stationed there. And there was some of the troops on the ship were Army people, as well as the Marines. But they took them. We went there, but at one time there was a ship. One of the President Line ships had tried to run into without a pilot. Had tried to enter the bay, and there's been mines strung across there. And this ship went in there and hit the cable with the mines on it. And the mines came in from each side, hit him on the side of the ship, and blew a big hole right across the whole ship. And he sank immediately, and he was sitting there in the harbor. But we went in there, and we stayed one night. We unloaded the Army personnel, and then they took us to a place called New Caledonia. And we went to Caledonia. They took us, the Marines, off of the ship. And I can remember the incident aboard the ship is one of the men found out where the officers kept their liquor supply. And we broke into the liquor supply, and each got us a couple of small bottles of alcohol. I do recall that. Went from there we transferred to Army, to a Navy transport. Navy transport, then we went to another island, and there we transferred to another Navy transport, which took us to Guadalcanal. And I got to Guadalcanal on October the 12th, 1942, as a member of the 2nd Replacement Battalion. I was left aboard ship to unload it, help unload it. And the hole that we had where we had our bunks to protect us, they could all be moved over to the side, taken apart, and they could lift the flooring out, which is the deck, we called it. And they could take it all out, and then they could load supplies underneath there. Well, I was left aboard ship as a work party, as a member of the working party. And I don't know how time it was. It was after, I know it was after we had breakfast. Must have been, well, we got there about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and the ship never did anchor. It just cruised very slowly up down the harbor, or along the side of the coast. Anyway, while we were there, and I was down in the hole unloading the ship, Japanese planes came in from another island, because we had secured the airfield on Guadalcanal by that time, and they had no place to fly to. They off of the canal. They had to go from another island group. And they came over us with dive bombers and fighter planes and torpedo planes, and they bombed and strafed ships that were in the harbor. The ship I was on didn't get hit, but the hole I was working in took a near miss, and it sprung the plates on the hull, and they would start taking on water about 200 gallons a minute. So they got us all up out of the hole, they closed it up, made it waterproof, they sealed it off. And my sea bag was still there. I couldn't get to it. All I had, I could put on my back was my pack. 2-piece part, one hanging at the bottom off of your butt and the other over your shoulders. I had the ammunition belt, canteen. I had a helmet. I had my utility clothes on. We were told to leave ship. Leave everything where it was, except, I was carrying a Thompson submachine gun and 120 rounds of ammunition in my belt. Went down the cargo net. And that was my first time to go down the cargo net. I thought to myself, if I ever get my foot caught in the wrong place on that net, I'm not gonna live, because I fall off that net with all that weight I got on. I'm gonna go to the bottom. So I said, I got to do something different. So I developed my own technique. Every time I went down the cargo net, after I got over and got my feet on it and started down, I went down hand over hand with my knees bent back, so that my feet could not go slipping through that net. But I got on the island at Guadalcanal on the beach, and we were told to wait there, and people that whatever unit we were supposed to be, that we were being assigned to, would come to pick us up. They come and picked up a lot of the people, and I'm still sitting there.
Unknown caller.
Damn thing. But I roamed up and down that beach, and I believe if you look at that picture on the wall in my bedroom, I believe that's the same beach I was on. I think it was called Red Beach. But I roamed up and down that beach looking for somebody to come to pick me up, to claim me to be in their company, their outfit. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. All I had was the stuff I had on. I had water, because I had the canteen. I had eaten about 4 o'clock that morning, because we ate before the ship got there. And I had no lunch. I went over and I got tired of walking, so I went over and I sat down with my back up against a coconut palm tree. And I sat there for about a half an hour, watching people come by. And finally, a guy came by in a truck, panel truck, had seats in it so people could hold the troops in the back. And he looks at me sitting there, he says, "Are you Hawkins?" And I says, "Yes, I am." He says, "I've been looking all over for you." I says, "I've been looking for you also." But we got on, he took me into the cab of the truck. We drove around the airfield. We drove around a hospital tent. And we went back to the edge of the jungles along the one river. And back into these, there's an open spot there, area, but there was we were under the edge of the jungle, right at the edge of the jungle, maybe 100 feet in, where the tents could be set up without being obvious and stuff of that nature. Got out of the, I said it was late. The people that had been assigned to that area along with me, there were 5 of us, 6 of us altogether, had we were assigned to 1st Signal Company, Division Headquarters Battalion. And they had put up a tent, and I wasn't there, but they had dug a foxhole for me outside the tent. And it was not too late in the evening, but it was after dark. The captain made the mess cook get up and find me something to eat, because I hadn't eaten. And what he gave for me was, you might not like it, but it tasted very good to me. It was a sandwich made out of the tongue of a cow that they had found and butchered on the island. He had boiled the mess cook had boiled his tongue, and he sliced it like he would slice ham or a piece of luncheon meat. And that was my sandwich. That's what I ate that night. But shortly after we had all gone to bed, and we had mosquito netting up on the bunks. Shortly after we had gone into the bunks, the artillery up in the hills started shooting at the airfield. Well, we were between them and the airfield. Rounds were falling short, and we all got up to go to the foxhole. And 3 of us never made it to the foxhole. The one fella had an epileptic seizure. And whenever people have seizures from epileptic like that, they have a tendency to kind of swallow their tongue and not be able to breathe, not getting any oxygen. So he had this stroke, and usually they would wrestle around, they roll around, they get dirty and everything. This one fellow held him down, straddled him and held him down. And I took my hand and pushed his jaw apart and held his tongue up so he couldn't swallow it. And he went home the very next day. He got on the island one day and they took him off because having a seizure like that, he was a danger to all of us. But now I'm assigned to the 1st Signal Company, Division Headquarters Battalion, radio operator, the radio section. I did Morse code. I could copy Morse code at the rate of about 30 words a minute. The words are considered to be 5-letter words, 5 characters of letters. And I could copy about 30 of them. And I could send about that many too. So I became an operator that was used quite a bit for the rest of the time I was there. I remember one day I was on duty in a radio station, and it was made out of logs, coconut logs, and sandbags. And they had taken a table and made a table out of long branches off of trees and tied them all together. The radio set was sitting on top of that. I'm in there by myself, and the air raid siren goes off, and so at just about that minute, I started receiving a message, and I'm copying that message. And as I said, the table was not very sturdy; it was kind of rickety. But I started copying, and I felt somebody walk up behind me, and I didn't think anything about it. But then this man he leaned back up against the table. He'd come in to get away from the bombing and the strafing. And without looking up, and I was copying, as I said. And I said to him, I said, "Get your ass off the table." And somebody patted me on the shoulder. They stood up and patted me on the shoulder. And he says, "I'm sorry, son." And I looked up. It was the commanding general of the division, General Vandercraft. How many people get by telling the general to get his ass off the table? But I did. One of those things. We left the island. If you look at the picture on the wall behind this one here in my bedroom, that's a picture of Red Beach. That's where the 5th Marines landed, and that's where I went ashore, and that's where I left from. But that picture there is not our outfit. That is a picture of the 1st Marines Regiment. And they were the ones that took a beating on Peleliu. But that was there. We left the island and went to Brisbane, Australia. I can remember Brisbane, Australia, because they went up a river to where the docks were. That was the muddiest water I ever saw. And we went down the cargo net again to get onto the dock, get off the ship. And they took us out to a camp. And we were there. The tents were set up. And we were in a tent, but we had a mess hall. And I think I ate 2 meals in a mess hall. And I came down with malaria. And I was so sick that I didn't even want to go eat. And the other 5 men in my tent, would each bring me back something from the mess hall to keep my energy up. And they did that until about 5 days. And then they come and took us down to the docks to put us on a ship, because we were coming down with malaria as bad, worse than we were on Guadalcanal. And they took us to Melbourne. They were going to take us to Melbourne, Australia, and I knew we were going to leave. That's why I wouldn't go to sick bay. That's why I said, "No, you get breakfast for me, and I'll sit here and eat it in a tent." And they didn't do that. But that morning, we got ready to go to the docks. It was a sunshiny day. I can remember the sunshine. And I looked at that truck and said, "How in the hell am I going to get up into that bed?" Because it had those seats along the side. And two of the guys out of the tent helped me get up onto the bed and get in one of those seats. One of them sat on one side of me, and one of them sat on the other side of me, and helped me up so I wouldn't fall. They drove us down to the docks to get on another ship to go to Melbourne, Australia. I had to climb a cargo net again, and I did, with my pack on my back. I climbed over the railing. I took 3 or 4 steps and fell flat on my face. For the next 5 days, I was in a coma. I ran a temperature of 105 and 106. And lucky I'm still alive. But I can't remember the trip. They put me into. I remember one thing happening on that ship. I was lying there, and they come to give me medication or something like that. And it was the same kind of ship. I was it was not a sick bay. It was not where I had a individual bed or something like that. But it was a bunch of I think about 5 cots up straight up and down. And I was in the center one, so people could come walk by. There's one here and one here, and I'm here. And they could make the corpsman could take my temperature and could do things whatever they had to do. And I can remember waking up, coming to long enough to see this one guy come up, and he was trying to talk to me, and I couldn't talk back to him. But anyway, we got to Melbourne, Australia. And I remember the dock. And I was able to, with their help, by the help of other people, I was able to get out onto the dock. But they had a band there, and it played Waltzing Matilda. And that's one of my favorite songs to this day. But anyway, they put us in a truck took us on a train, took us down to out to a camp in the name of the camp was Balcom, Illinois. I'm trying to remember Balcom, Illinois. Camp Balcom. It was outside Melbourne, about 50, 60 miles. And 5th Regiment was there from the Marines. That's the regiment my father was in, by the way, whenever he was in Europe. But I was always next to them someplace. Every battle I was in. Well, they took us out to this Camp Balcom, and the captain told us, they had us in Quonset huts out there, kind of big huts, it galvanized, and but we were right next, the one where they put me was right next to the mess hall, and the company mess cook was given orders by the commander that he was to make sure that I got all my meals. I didn't have to come to the mess hall to get them. He was to bring them to me in the barracks. And he was just inside. If that was the door to come into the barracks, he had the cot. His cot was right here. That's where he slept. You take an aisle about this wide, and that's where my bunk was. And that's where I slept. And he made damn sure I had food 3 times a day. And he brought them to me until I got better. After I got better, we were given leave, all of us, at some time or other, were given 4-day weekend leaves. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we could go into Melbourne, Australia, which I did almost every week after I got the belly better. And I met people that I liked, and we were heroes there. We could hardly seldom buy ourselves a beer. Somebody wanted to buy it for us. If we were in a place, I even went into one place, and this guy told me, he says, I have 2 daughters at home. He says, I'd like for you to come out and meet one of them. But I didn't take him up on it. I was doing something else at the time. But they had a parade. The Australian troops had been sent to Africa and to fight the battle with the Germans in Africa, and they were bringing them home from El Alamein in Africa, and they wanted us to have. They had a parade plan that we were supposed to march, and I did. I marched. If there's a picture in my book, I'll get it for you before you leave. But there is it's called the Old Breed. That's what our 1st Marine Division is called today, the Old Breed, because we were the first ones in battle in World War II. And we've fought in a lot of battles since then. Still do it. They're still fighting them. But I was lucky enough that I marched in that parade. If I show you on a picture, I'm in the fourth group that's back from the head of the parade. And after I got out of that parade, I met a girl, and she invited me out to her house, and her parents fed me dinner that night. And then I never did date her after that, but I saw her that night and went back into town. The next night I went to the city on my 4-day weekend. I met the girl that I dated the entire time I was there. Her name was Sheila Watson. Her brother was one of the Australians that had come back from Alamein while I was there. But I was their hero. And they would tell everybody that I was their hero. Like Mike did the other day. But one night they decided to have a party for me one weekend. And they invited all their friends to this party. And I had a relapse of malaria. And I had the chills so bad I was just shaking. Then 5 minutes later I'd be burning up with a fever. And it'd all go back to the same thing. And I was not much company, and I was not enjoying myself. But I used to stay there on weekends because they had an extra room, and I would sleep in that room. Actually, it wasn't a room, it was a porch, but it was closed in. And they were going to put me out to bed with all kinds of blankets over me. And I can remember the girl that I was dating, her name was Sheila. And her father told her, he says, "You go ahead and crawl in bed with him and keep him warm." Well, she refused. She didn't come out there, but we still dated for the rest of the time I was there. She used to communicate with my mother. They'd write back and forth to each other. They did it for some time. Even after we left Melbourne, Australia, we went to a place. I went to a place with my group, my company, called Goodenough Island, which was on New Guinea. It was about 70 miles from where the Japanese were bivouacked. And the kunai grass that grew there was higher than your head. It had to be at least 7 foot tall, growing up there. And you had paths through it. You couldn't see where you were going. You had to follow those paths that the natives had walked through there, made them. But they had built a thatched roof for us for the company, communications. And the captain or the commanding officer was at one end of it. And then in the center they had what we called the message center. That's where they coded and decoded messages. And then they had the wind where I was at was where the radio station was and where the switchboard for the wire section was. And so and then we had the tent. Whenever we got there, by the way, the longest time I ever went without sleep. I went for 72 hours without sleep. I was working and unloading ships to get all of our supplies off of them. And I can remember that morning, and whenever the last supplies had been shipped, we went up out of the hole and went to wait for transportation to where I was supposed to go to the camp. And I was so tired that I thought I was lying down in the shade of one of the gun tubes where the anti-aircraft guns were on the ship. And it was shady whenever I laid down, but it was hot. So we were maybe 10 degrees south of the equator. That's all we were. So it was a very hot place. But I took my shirt off, and I used it for a pillow. So I'm lying there like that, and the ship swung at anchor. So I'm no longer in the shade, but I'm laying in the sun. And I got sunburned like you wouldn't believe. Well, now then, getting sunburned was something that you could be really chastised for. The captain could give you what they call geo time. But because of the fact that I had stayed up so long, 72 hours without sleep, the captain did not give me geo time. So I got by lucky again. And also, I think he wanted to keep me operating as an operator. Because there were two of us in the company, there in the radio section, that could send and receive copies, stuff the fastest. And I don't think he wanted to lose me. So he never chastised me. But I can remember playing poker one night. I won $400. And I put it under my pillow on my bunk. And I made my bunk up, and I went to the radio station to do my job. I come back, and all my money was gone. So I didn't get to enjoy that $400 at all. But the morning that we were getting ready to leave the island, before we were going to close everything down, we had already landed in the end of December. The 1st Division had landed on Cape Gloucester, which is on the island of New Britain. It was in the Solomon Islands also, and they were going to close us down and send us up to be with them. So the guy that was on the other end, he sent one message and says, "Put Hawkins on," just like that. So they put me on there. I sent and copied, I think 5 messages, one after the other. I sent them. I didn't copy anything because they were just getting the information from us. And whenever I got up there, this kid, his name was John Merton, he told me, he says, "You know something?" He says, "We didn't have a single character out of place." He said, "Every one of them were correct." I felt pretty good.
Yeah.
And he felt pretty good because he had copied it. So, but I got there. I didn't get there through the heavy fighting, but I got there through it, and it's the worst damn place in the world you'd ever want to be. We landed in a swampy area. You walk through stuff up to halfway up your lower leg. You're wading through mud and muck. And the mosquitoes and the bugs, I never saw such big bugs in my life. And the roads got so bad, the jeeps couldn't even travel. They were stuck. The ones we were trying to make, the roads we were trying to make. But we finally succeeded in driving the Japanese back. And so then we were taken to an island called Pavuvu. It was one of the Solomon Islands. It was a nice little island, but it was loaded with land crabs, loaded with dead coconut leaves, fawns, loaded with fallen coconut trees. There were no roads, there was no way to get through. It had to be cleaned up. And we did. We cleaned it up. We made it look like a country club. I'll show you pictures of that place, too, in a book. I'll show you the tent I slept in. And that one picture they had of me with a rifle over my shoulder, or it was a carbine, that was the island that this picture was taken on. So, I was sergeant of the guard that day. But one of the things that I had to do besides that, with cleaning up the island, was I had to charge of helping install radios in other places, and they brought a amphibian tractor in, and we had the job of putting a big radio set into it and hooking it up so we could operate while we were in that amphibian tractor. But we also had the problem because we were copying the Navy network, which is a very high-speed network, and we were trying to get as much distance as we could out of our radios and what we could transmit and what we could receive. So they said, how are we going to do it? So the decision was made that we were going to cut the top out of a coconut tree. And then we were going to go up and hook it into the regular height of a mast up made of aluminum material. We were going to secure that to the top of the tree, and we'd have our antenna going across the top of that. Well, we couldn't use the radio people to do it, but they gave me a pair of gaffs. You see people climb telephone poles? Well, that's what I did. I took a saw, I put the gaffs on, I put the belt on, I hooked the saw onto the belt, and I climbed that tree fighting ants that were a half inch longer or bigger, all the way up. They were trying to get into my ears and my nose and my mouth. But I cut the top out of that tree, I pulled that there aluminum thing up, and I secured it in place. And then I went back down. Nobody else did. I don't know why I always volunteered for stuff for some reason. Just in my makeup. But anyway, that's where I came. Well, I went back there. I went back there. We could put a coconut tree in our log that had fallen into the ocean, and we would the troops like to swim someplace, so they'd use that tree as a reference point. A lot of people would be there swimming at a time. And I had the job one day of sitting up there on a high perch with a M1 rifle so that I could shoot sharks if they came out while these guys were swimming.
Did you see any sharks?
I didn't have to shoot any of them because none came in, but I was there waiting anyway. That was one of the, you didn't do it every day, but once in a while you had to do what you were told to do. That's where I made sergeant on that island. But we left that island and we went to a place called Peleliu. Peleliu is north of the equator, about 7 or 8 degrees. Maybe only 6 degrees, I think it was. Hottest damn place in the world. Temperatures in the daytime, around midday, would run 115 degrees. It was coral. The entire island was a coral island. You couldn't dig a foxhole, but there were palm trees grew on it. There were some of them got their water down there and got where they were at. And the Japanese would climb the palm trees and secure themselves up there, and they would shoot at us from up there. But the first day, I lay on the beach after I went off the amphibian tractor, taking us in. I lay on the beach for about 2 hours, but my feet were almost in the water. And there was an incline that was maybe 2.5, 3 feet to where you got up to the top of the coral island. That's where the Japanese had built their airfield, or were building an airfield. It was not complete yet, but getting close. And it had to be taken. At least MacArthur said so. Well, that first day, we finally managed to make it up over that, and our troops took the airfield, or were taking the airfield. I had climbed up, and I was setting a radio set up in a hole that had been caused by a bomb having fallen there. and exploding. And I didn't have to dig through the coral. But I took a coconut log that was been broken off, and I had put it with my crew. I had 3 guys that reported to me. And we put that coconut log in a tree. And we had the radio that we had were four items you had to have. You had to have a transmitter receiver. You had to have an antenna. You had to have a generator to provide power for it. And you had to have an accessory bag to hold the accessories and cables and stuff that you needed. Well, we got the radio all set up. And the Japanese decided they were going to come and drive us back into the ocean. And they tried. I counted myself. I was standing there watching them come across it with their tanks. I counted 13 tanks coming across the airfield directly at us. That got help from the Navy and from the Marine pilots that were stationed aboard the aircraft carriers. They were flying so low that I could almost swear they're no higher than the ceiling. They went over me that way, and they were strafing and shooting at those tanks and bombing them or shooting. I mean, rockets, small rockets, whatever they had on them at that time for ammunition. And they stopped all 13 of them. They never got halfway across the island. And that day, the 5th Regiment took the airfield. We moved clear across it, and the next day I followed it. But I had had an experience that night before. The first morning, one of my men, we were sitting in, it was nighttime, we were all night long, we were in this here bomb hole with the radio. I had received one message, and I had crawled out to take it to the message center so it could be decoded. I came back, and this one guy, it was his first landing, first combat area, and he was scared. I mean, you can't be scared, you got to do things. But he was scared. And I started to crawl back into that hole, and he had his carbine right in my face. I took it away from him. If you can't wait to find out who your enemy is, then you don't have it. But I gave it back to him later. But that first morning, after I'd done all that, there was some mortar fire that came in from the Japanese. It was back up in the hills in the edge of the jungle. And one of them had exploded right outside where we were at. A piece of shrapnel, about 6 inches long, the size of my hand, maybe a little longer, and about maybe 4 or 5 inches, 6 inches thick, about 2 inches thick, I should say, but wide, and then had broken away and hit before this happened, before the bomb went off. This guy asked me, he says, "Sarge," he says, "I'm getting rather cramped sitting here on this log." He said, "You think you could relieve me and let me take it to radio and you take this?" I said, "Sure, I'll do that for you." I said, "But let me send out a message first." I said, "Crank it up so I can send a message out." Well, he started cranking that there. He just got the power up, and that thing hit. And it exploded. And he didn't have his helmet on. He was sitting down to the hole. And a slab about 2 inches wide, about 8 inches long, about 2 inches thick. Went right through the middle of his head. Broke his skull wide open. Like you'd cut a piece of fruit or something. It was that clean. Then it had fallen off of him into the hole itself. I called for a corpsman. I put sulfur drugs into the wound. And they come and they took him away, and they put him on a stretcher and took him down to the beach where they could put him on a amphibian tractor to take him back out to the hospital ship. I'm bothered to this day. I can't remember that guy's name. I wish I could. I have checked the roster. I have looked at every name on that roster, and I can't put his face to any of those names. I guess I feel guilty because I didn't trade places with him. Well, anyway, I tried to pick up that piece of metal that had hit him in the head. It was burning hot. And then I knew why there had been any blood around that wound. Not a single drop of blood, because this thing had cauterized it as it went through and cut it open. It was that hot. But whenever I looked into his head that morning, I could see every groove and ridge of his brain, where the brain was at. And it bothers me. But we finally finished up the island, which was a steadily costly island. The division had approximately 20,000 men in it, counting all the regiments. You had the 1st, the 5th, the 1st, the 5th, the 7th, the 11th, and the 17th, which was a pioneer. And then we had the battalion, headquarters battalion, which made up the division. We had about 20,000 men all told. On that island, we had 6,000 people killed or wounded. Costly. And you know what? That island was never used for what we wanted. MacArthur it was his decision to land us there. And he says, I'm sending my Marines to the island. Well, he did. And we paid the price. But it was never used. It was never used to put planes on, except for one reason. There was a ship called the Indianapolis that was carrying the atomic bomb to the islands down there. That ship, on its way back from where delivering the bomb, was hit by a submarine, torpedoed, and sank because he did not follow Navy rules and travel like he was supposed to. Well, those people, the sailors that were in the water, after that was the ones that were not killed and the ones that didn't drown, were finally rescued by float planes, brought to the island, and then they were flown from the island out. That was the only good thing that ever happened on that island. But that was on and after that was over, we went back to Shabubu, and then I got the call one day that you're going home, back to the States. So I was put aboard a ship. It was a hospital ship. They were bringing people back, wounded back to the States. I think there were about 20 of us that got aboard that ship out of my company. And I remember we had to climb the cargo net. And we sat out there for an amphibian tractor for hours waiting to climb that cargo net. They finally told us we could come aboard. But the cargo net, if you know how ships are made, the fantail, it's curved in like this, and it's curved in like this. Well, the net that we were supposed to climb hung straight down, but it was not up against the ship. It was swinging there about 10 feet away from the hull whenever you first got onto it. And then, of course, you'd have to... But now that you're climbing the cargo net lying down, You're climbing and pulling yourself up and trying to climb it. And you're on your back, and of course, the higher you get, the straighter it gets. Well, I had a guy he was my nemesis. He really was my nemesis. A guy named Lyle Hines. He's from Minnesota. And he, well, going into the island for the landing, he decided we were on our way in. We were still 500-600 yards out. He decided he had to empty his bowels. So, how is he going to do it? Well, we told him, climb up on the back of this here amphibian tractor, and two of us will hold you, and you can go lower your clothes and take what you have to do. And he did it that way. And we held on to him, and we got him in. Well, he was all right until we got ready to leave. Now he's on the same group that I'm at, ready to leave Pavuvu. And he gets halfway up the net, and he can't go any further. So I climbed there, and I asked him what was wrong. He said, well, he couldn't do it. I can't go any further. So I went down. I climbed up. I said, well, you wait right here, and I climbed the net the rest of the way up. I took my pack off and my weapon and everything and put them on the deck, and I climbed back down the net. I got down to him, and I managed to take his pack and his weapon away from him. And then I climbed them up to them, and I said, now you climb up too. And he said, I still can't go. So I took his equipment all up and put it on the deck. And I went back down, and I got behind him, and I held him in front of me as he climbed up the net the rest of the way to the deck. I was second in command of our group that was on there. A guy named Jim Oles from Cleveland, Ohio, was not from Cleveland, but he was from Ohio. But he was in charge because he was a staff sergeant. Now it's a sergeant. And so we were in charge of those groups, and we took them all the way back to the States. But as we got closer to the States, after being in the climate down there in the tropics for 2 years, we were freezing to death coming into San Diego. I mean, we were all just shaking. Could hardly take the weather. It was too cold for it. We got over that, but after we got to San Diego, they took me and our group to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, where I had gone through that. We were going through boot camp, and where I had gone to radio school. And they set the tents up, and the tent that I was in was no more than 100 yards from where I went to radio school. Coincidence, or fate, I don't know which it was. But then, from there, they gave me a 30-day leave. First time I'd been home since I left on April the 14th. So I got to see my family for the first time. But on the way there, I had to go to Los Angeles from San Diego to catch a train to go to St. Louis, where I would catch another bus to go home. And that was something that I didn't have to. I was there too early, and I had to wait. And I'm nothing to do. So I was sitting in the bar in the train station, having a beer, and there's another Marine there, whose name I found out was Bill Silkwood. He was from East St. Louis. And he and I traveled on the train together. But we sat there so long drinking our beer that the train had called all aboard, and we were just getting ready to leave. We actually had to run to catch the train to come home. And we did. We got here. So then I got on the bus, went home. My Aunt Pearl picked me up at the station, and I stayed with her in East St. Louis for a day. Then I went home to visit my parents. So I was there for 30 days, and then I had to ship back out from St. Louis to San Francisco. San Francisco was 100 Heritage Street. Was the depot, Marine Corps depot of supplies, where they repaired stuff and they stored stuff and they shipped stuff out and what have you. It was right at the San Francisco side of the Oakland Bay Bridge. Look out the window, you can see the bridge right at the foot of it. And I spent my next year 9 months there. I got there on January the 9th of 1945. From there I went home, as I said, and I came back, and I got discharged. I discharged me from Mare Island, which is a naval prison, but they took me up there to give me my severance pay, give me $100 that I had to travel with the money to take home with me to get there. And so that's whenever I was out of the, now no longer a Marine, October the 5th, 1945. It took me almost a month from the time that happened before I got home, Mount Vernon. What I did is I stayed in San Francisco with my friends for a couple of weeks. And then I got on a train and I went to Chicago. And in Chicago, I had some friends there, so I spent another couple of weeks with them. And then I caught a bus and went to Mount Vernon. So now I'm no longer a Marine and I'm back in civilian life. Right to my family and my censors had everything that you wrote had to be censored. They had one of the officers in the company had to read every letter you wrote, everything you sent home, and they would take and they would cut stuff out of it with a razor blade, and they'd cut this section out or that section out, so they didn't know exactly where you were at. And I remember whenever I was overseas, and the combat was going on, and Dad got the letter, was all cut up like that, he knew that I was in combat. Because he had been there and he knew what happened. So he immediately, he was in the VFW, so he immediately put me into the VFW, signed me up, and paid my dues. So from January of 1943 until present, I've been a VFW member. Probably the longest of anybody's alive right now.